going to go ahead and start on time. Graham or Kate, are there any announcements before we go ahead and get started?
I think you're good to go. We had an announcement about Innovate US in the chat that I'm going to repost in case people join since I did it, but I think you're good to roll, Beth.
Wonderful, and we're happy to see our colleagues from across state government. And I am, as I said, the Chief Innovation Officer for the state of New Jersey, but I see colleagues here from California and Colorado and Maine and other places as part of our newly launched Innovate US initiative to bring 21st century skills training to public servants around the country and to connect people around the country to one another to share the tribulations, travails, and joys of being in state government across the United States. So we hope that you can connect with one another, whether on this program or on future ones, and we're just delighted to have you here. I'm joined today by my colleague, Ed Paulino from the Office of Innovation, and he will be helping me out with this presentation today as we talk about equitable forms of public engagement. So let me start with a quick anecdote from the state of New Jersey, just to illustrate why I think equitable engagement is so important. For those of you from here, it won't come as any surprise to you that the COVID-19 Information Hub, covid19.nj.gov, which Graham and Ed and others spend a lot of their time on, has been an invaluable resource that serves the people of New Jersey. To the tune of 1 million people a week. We have only 8.8 or so million people in the state, but the site has served, Graham, can you tell me how many up until now?
Oh, I think we're at well over 10 million users have visited. It's hard to know if there's some duplicate counts in there though.
Oh, no, much more, Graham. That's 160 million over the course of the pandemic. I'm not just talking about recently. It's a lot of people who use this site, and it is really popular, I think, because the site was designed with the benefit of engagement. That is to say, engagement of various sources. On the one hand, taking the engagement that we got in the form of calls from people to our COVID-19 hotline, the 211 phone number. It helps to drive the choices of what information gets put front and center on the site. So by using the knowledge about what people want to know, we're able to reorganize the information in the way that makes most sense and is most useful to people. The site lets you also type in your questions. And so that data, those analytics that come from people about what people are asking about, further lets us customize and reorient and organize what we do. But there's more to the engagement than just that kind of passive engagement with the public. We also test all of the things that we do by actively asking and speaking with residents to ensure that the tools that we design are actually intelligible and useful to people. We've engaged with the universities across the state in the past to create an editorial team of students who have volunteered to help out at what I would call translating from government speak into plain English, so that what goes up here is actually easy to read and easy to understand in a format that people can use. And there's so much more to it than that. But essentially, it's just one example that I wanted to give of the importance of engaging with people in an effort to deliver more effective services and better policies that are more responsive to people's needs. So what I'm hoping we're going to do here today is to, in a very short hour, we're going to do a lightning fast exposition on the value of public engagement, going to then talk about how to design effective engagements, and hopefully do so with an eye towards focusing on equity. So how do we engage not only with the people we anyway would speak to, but in particular with vulnerable populations who otherwise don't generally have a voice and are generally not the people that we reach. Although I'll give a number of examples that relate to new technology and websites and things like that, none of what I'm talking about is limited to technology. So even if your job has nothing to do with websites or technology, everything we're talking about applies to offline as much as online. But that said, if we have time at the end, I'm going to try to introduce a couple of examples of new platforms for engagement that we can take advantage of, and that might help you to do your work. Last thought here, which is that we want to make this a conversation. So even though we don't have a lot of time, we very much want to hear from you about your experience engaging with people. So with that said, let me just ask Graham if you would push out a quick question to people, which is that we're interested in hearing from you about the ways in which you're already engaging with people. Graham, do you have access to that poll? If you can push that out.
I did a minute ago. Did someone else log on as Innovate US? It's telling me I'm logged on another device and inactive. Okay, perfect.
Looks like I have the power. I'm
Perfect.
not sure why, but I'm going to push that out. So a quick question to you for those who are on the phone and can't see this. We're asking people if you currently use resident engagement in your own work, again, offline, online. And if you said yes, if you are using new technology to facilitate that engagement. So just a quick poll of people here to understand how we're actually, what background you have in actually doing engagement. From the looks of the poll, it looks like a lot of people are already doing engagement. I'm going to push out the results in just a moment, but I'm getting a lot of yeses. So we definitely want to hear from you as we focus on this question of how we can do a better job, not only of engaging people, but engaging people in a more equitable and inclusive way. Okay, I'm going to end the poll here for a moment. I think we've got most people participating. So you should be able to see that. Let me see if you can see those. So you'll see, again, 68% of you said you're already using engagement, 32% said you're not, and then we got 50% of people saying you're using new technology to engage with people, 50% said you're not. So in other words, we have a healthy number of people who I hope after this may be able to expand what you're doing, or for those of you who aren't doing engagement might be able to do more than you're doing today. So please feel free as we go along to ask any questions that you have. Our goal here is to impart experience and skills and examples from that are going on not only in our own jurisdiction, but around the world that we can bring to bear for our own work. Quick note on process. If you want to interject with a comment or a question, you can just go like this and wave your hands. We're a small enough group that I think you can probably unmute, but for those who would like a more disciplined way of doing it, there's a button at the bottom of the screen. Let's see, I don't see reactions under, whoops, trying to see where's the raise hand button. I don't see it for myself, so I can't tell. So Anna has raised her hand. So Anna, tell us where's the button for you, since it's not on my screen.
So it's in reactions, and then it has the raise hand, and then it also has the remove raise hand.
Great. I think since I'm the presenter, I don't have a reaction button anymore. I do seem to have some nifty new buttons like annotate. So I can doodle. That's a new feature which didn't exist before. So I'm excited about that, but I will erase that. So that's very helpful. So again, reactions and raise hand or type in the chat or wildly gesture, and we'll go from there. So right from the get-go, let me say that citizen engagement, crowdsourcing, open innovation, public engagement, any of these terms are all fine. I also like the term collective intelligence or the wisdom of communities. We're not going to spend a lot of time today on nomenclature or on the differences, the nuanced differences between these different terms. I'm going to use them pretty interchangeably and generally just refer to public engagement. So let me state that right off the bat. So I might say public engagement, I might say collective intelligence. In every case, I'm just talking about how do we engage and talk to people, understood very broadly, to help us get more informed about understanding a problem or developing a solution to a problem. The second thing I want to just get right out of the way at the outset is to say that engagement is not always the right thing to do. Whereas philosophically, morally, participatory democracy and engaging with communities is the right thing in principle, In practice, it is not always the right thing to do. That is to say, in this chart, which I know is hard to read, so we're going to send this to you. If you are not in a position where you can actually use what people tell you, then you should not waste their time of asking them. It will only create more frustration, more distrust with government, and more challenges to not be prepared to ask people to use what people tell you. Whoops. That is now, I have managed to, can you still see the slides or have they gone away for you?
We're back on your slides page.
You're back on my slides page. Let me do that one more time again. But I'll keep going here and slideshow. Here we go. Sorry about that. And one more time. Okay. I will just go forward again. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean. So there is a citizen engagement website put out by the city of Madrid that's existed since about 2015. Got a lot of publicity when it was launched. It was an early kind of progenitor of citizen engagement, especially online engagement done by government. And when they first started this site called Decide Madrid, Madrid Decides, they got about 400,000 people signing up in the beginning. Long story short, it does a lot of things, the site. It has places where you can have discussions, and it has places where government puts up consultations and people can respond and comment. It also has a part of the site called proposals or propuestas. And on that part of the site, citizens can propose a policy or a piece of legislation that they want the city council to consider. Since 2015, how many citizen engagement proposals made by citizens would you imagine have become law in Madrid? Ben, I see you looking at me. Can you, how many things, you can tell by my question, how many citizen proposals would you imagine have become law? Oh, you're on mute.
I should turn my camera off so I don't get called on. No, I'm just teasing. I don't know. I might say maybe 0. I don't know.
You are correct. This was I wouldn't call, believe me, I'm a softie when it comes to question asking. It's a disaster, this part of the site, because it doesn't work. It's I won't go into the details, but basically in order to get a proposal considered, you have to get 1% of the population of the city signing on to your proposal. The people who then have to register in person to have their address validated before they can support your proposal. It's so complicated that there is no point in doing this. And I think it just is incredibly frustrating to people. And in fact, what you've seen is since 2015, although a lot of people signed up, nobody's using this part of the site anymore because it just doesn't work. So all that to say, not worth doing it if you can't make use of what people are telling you, if it's too complicated, if you can't, and here's where I come to a list that if you're on the phone, maybe we'll try to read some of these as we go along, but if you can't answer these 9 questions for yourself, and we want to go over these questions and see if we can provide a little guidance about how to do things like articulating the goal of the project. So I'm going to try to dive in and breeze through these. And we're going to talk about each of them, both from the perspective generally of doing engagement, and then from the perspective of equity and being more inclusive. And I really want to get your input on what you're doing or what you would advise us based on your own experience. So question 1 that you have to be able to answer is, can you clearly articulate to people what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish? Can you define a problem that you're hoping that people can help you to solve? If you can't do that clearly for people, then there's really no point in asking. So quick example here, last year during COVID, Department of Education in New Jersey, with our help, did an online consultation and asked parents and students and teachers, what are the greatest challenges that you are facing with regard to your child's education during COVID? And in fact, because there was a clearly articulated question and there was a clear statement that we're going to revise our policies based on what you're telling us, I think that made a real difference to why we were able to hear from 17,000 people in a 2-week period, is because there was a clear statement of why we were asking and why it mattered. So let me ask you guys your advice when it comes to this question again of articulating the project's goals. What do you think is important in terms of doing this in a way that will also reach vulnerable communities? And Ed, this is where I'm going to turn to you to share some of your thoughts, and then we'll see if anybody else has anything they want to chime in the chat or out loud.
Sure. Thanks, Beth. So one overarching theme you're going to see throughout the presentation is this idea of equity being a lens through which you see all the different component parts of what you're doing. So it can't be an afterthought. And that's why when it comes to project goals, that's something that you want to do, at the outset. It can't be something that you're like, oh, shoot, I forgot, I have to do this or other thing. It has to be something you kind of bake in from that project planning and project goal setting process. I'll pause there, Beth. I don't know if we want to go to the next slide with the group's equity insights.
Right. So we're going to, before we go on to the next question, let's see if there's anything else that the folks want to add or anything coming up in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to keep on going. Okay, we'd love to again hear from you about your own experiences as we go along with regard to what you're learning. We don't have a monopoly here on good ideas. So second question I think we need to get answers to is the question of whether you can identify who should participate. So when we talk about public engagement, the tendency is to assume that we need the public to participate, but we might have a need for a more specific audience than that. Let me say a word about that and then come back to this concept of selection and self-selection in a moment that's on the slide. There's a wonderful project out of the UK called Good Sam. We have a related project in the United States called Pulse Point, which maybe Graham or Kate could put in the chat because it's an awesome project. And what Pulse Point and Good Sam do is essentially allow people who have first responder expertise. Basically, you've been trained in first aid or CPR by the Red Cross. And what it does is it sends you a message if somebody near you is having a heart attack or has suffered an accident or has a problem. So it uses the data from 911 calls to emergency to geolocate the person having the accident with the person nearby who might have a cell phone, and basically sends a message to you and says, can you rush to the aid of that person and help to perform CPR? Data shows that when every minute sooner that a person suffering cardiac arrest gets bystander CPR, whether it's CPR or use of a defibrillator, it increases their chances of living by 50%. So all that to say, if I'm doing a project like Good Sam or Pulse Point, I'm not trying to engage with everybody. I'm not looking for the public. I'm looking for people specifically who have CPR training and the ability to use a defibrillator. So I have a specific audience that I'm trying to get to. So we want to think about ways in which we can target whom we're trying to speak to for our engagement. It is the case that we may not want to talk even to members of the public at all. We may actually want to talk to other colleagues across our own agency, colleagues across different agencies, colleagues like we have here on the call across different states. Maybe it's people in universities, maybe it's people in industry. We can have different audiences. It doesn't have to be the public just generically, and we should be able to answer for ourselves what is the public we're trying to reach. So Ed, let me pass it to you to say a little bit more about the idea of combining selection and self-selection here and also put it to everyone else to see if anyone else has advice about how to identify participants.
Great. Yeah, so that point on whether to use selection or self-selection is so important. So the self-selection, if you're doing something where you have you kind of recruit an audience that's super enthusiastic, right? They raise their hands up they're interested in engaging, whether it's because of their life experience or some kind of intrinsic passion that they have. There are a lot of projects where that's a huge resource to tap into, and it serves a project's goals well. Similarly, you also want to look at selection. So there might be people who are not part of the conversation, whose voice is not being represented. And so this question of kind of periodically asking, whose voice isn't in the room is really important. And whether that's through barriers, whether that's through other issues of their not being able to participate, being able to ask that question can be very illuminating and will inform what kinds of things you can do to make sure you're a little bit more representative.
You're on mute, Beth.
You're still on mute, Beth.
There we go. Sorry, I was having trouble getting the controls to come up. There we go. Let me try to go back a second here. Sorry about the slides. I'm just trying to activate the controls and instead I'm advancing the slides here. So quick example of what Ed is talking about, and we'd love to again hear what you're working on in the region of Brussels, Belgium. So they have a local government and a regional government and then a national government. In the region, they have started as part of their parliament to create what they call a citizens assembly. That is to say they have a representative sample of citizens who serve on every parliamentary committee. So to achieve greater equity, they have a representative sample of the population. There, of course, what representation means in Belgium looks a little different than it does here. But they use representative participation rather than just what we often see, which is self-selection, where people just volunteer to tell us what they think. Anybody else here have good examples of or experience with either representative or self-selected participation? Let's see if there's anything going on in the chat.
Ben, I think you had your hand up previously.
Yeah. Beth and Graham, I was gonna share, the experience that here in the DP for the State Park Service. Last year we had engaged the public, and it was kind of precipitated out of COVID. Engaged the public on a Liberty State Park restoration plan, where because of COVID we couldn't have a typical public meeting. We didn't, it wasn't feasible to do that, so we were leveraging to go to meeting to allow, and I was part of the team running the meeting, like hundreds of people participating, where probably even if we had a public meeting, we wouldn't even have that ability. So, and we had reached out at Liberty State Park to try to get, feedback from the a lot of the local, people and organizations there to, to have that voice in what was going on in terms of the restoration of the wetlands and impacted areas of that park. So,
Ben, did people, so did you select who participated, or did people self-select and volunteer to participate?
It was I don't know, I guess I got to think about that. I know we used, our website and social media to get the message out that there was that this public hearing was going to be out there and public meeting was going to be out there. Was there some targeted selection? Management might have tried to get at certain groups to try to get them to participate. But yeah, it's probably a combination of both, to be honest.
Very interesting. Let me move us forward as a way to advance this part of the conversation, and would love to bring in other folks to hear about your experience here. Even when we can identify who should participate, it doesn't always mean we can reach them. So this is building on Ben's point of just, you have to get things up on the website, you have to get things out in newsletters, you have to get them out on flyers. I was talking the other day to folks from a foundation called the David Prize. I don't know if any of you have heard of it because it's very local. It's a very local prize. And I asked them, how are you so successful at getting so many people to apply for this prize? And what they said was they're a foundation, they have lots and lots of money. Their most successful way of reaching people is by putting up flyers in the laundromat. So they're really keen on reaching people who are not necessarily going to be reading government websites or reading foundation websites. So it's not always a technological thing, but there needs to be a process for actually reaching people. One quick thought here, and then I'm going to pull in more people here, is to create what you might call a media kit, or what you might just call some content, to make it easier for other people to amplify your engagement. So when we did an engagement in the state of New Jersey to ask workers about the impact of technology on the future of work for them, as policymakers, we're thinking about lifelong learning, we're thinking about how to fund lifelong learning, what kinds of policies we need to put in place to protect people. We wanted to know what were the issues that really mattered to people in the labor space. And so we reached out to about 40 different, I should say, not we, Ed here did all the heavy lifting of reaching out to about 40 different interest groups and created for them a media kit. Here's a sample newsletter post, here's a sample tweet, here's a sample of a paragraph or a page. And we did it in English and we did it in Spanish to make it easy for people to do the hard work of reaching out for us. So let me sort of see who else has some good experience here. Ed, I'll start with you, and then we'll see who else we can bring in terms of reaching out to people.
Sure. Yeah, one thing that always comes to mind is this idea there on that first bullet of meeting people where they are. And I know that's a concept a lot of us may be familiar with. I like to think about it two ways. One, figuratively, where you're, inhabiting, you're being empathetic with your potential audience. You're thinking about how to frame things in a way that's relevant to them. You can also think about that literally, like the way that Beth mentioned with flyers in the laundromat. We've seen the efficacy of getting mobile testing sites and vaccination sites, making them mobile, getting them out into the community. This idea of going to people and doing so, bridging that gap that might otherwise be there. And so the media kit, right, it's a huge way to kind of help your stakeholders and be amplifiers, right? They're probably very busy with providing a lot of important services to the community. And so any step you can take to make participating and engaging in your program will go a long way.
Anything from friends in Maine or California that you want to share? Try to bring in some more states here. John from Maine, you put something in the chat. Can I embarrass you and call on you?
Yes, sure. We have an ad hoc construction board formed by law, and it has labor management, union and non-union reps. And basically it's to help us figure out the technical issues with respect to construction wages, setting construction wages for state projects.
So you have a kind of statutory framework that requires you to engage stakeholders in the process. And that can be very helpful for ensuring that diverse voices are brought to bear in a process, which is useful. The challenges with a lot of these things, just the participation often tends to be either we don't even measure who participates, or when we do, we learn that it tends to be middle-aged male participants. Usually of a certain income level. And so anything that we can do to try to diversify that participation is crucial. Here in Rio del Sul, which is the picture you're looking at here, a state in Brazil, to foster a public engagement, they actually drove around with a van with computers to help people log on to a citizen engagement project that they had in order to help people to participate more easily. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving forward here, and then maybe we can also bring in some more voices here. You have to determine for an engagement who is the right owner of the engagement. Now, it can be the case that it's very important for government to be the owner, As was the case, here is an example, a picture that we're showing from a project in Mexico called the City Challenge Project, which was done in the city of San Pedro in Mexico, a community of about 150,000 outside of Monterrey, Mexico. And it was really important for the city to be the owner, because the city was able to say, not only are we going to listen to you, but we're going to implement what you tell us. But it's not always the case, because people often don't trust government or don't have a good relationship with government, for the government to actually be the owner. So maybe, Ed, I can go to you first, and then others might have experiences of where you've collaborated with someone outside of government to run the engagement for you.
Right, to your point, Beth, there's a thinking about who that right owner is, right? Who is the whether it's the right messenger or the right program manager for the particular process is really important. Sometimes having a kind of in-between person or some more of a neutral organization could lend itself to soliciting more candid responses and candid engagement from the audience. But sometimes you do kind of want that legitimacy that either a government partner might lend or someone that the public has a lot of confidence that's actually going to end up running with what the public is recommending.
Great. Let's see if we have any additional experiences that people can share in the chat. And I'm going to keep moving forward with, oops, sorry, another slide here. I forgot. But I think you've made all these good points. And I'm going to go forward to our next kind of question, 5 out of 9 on our list. Next question, I think it's important to be able to answer in order to do an effective engagement. Again, whether it's online or offline, whether it's the public or whether it is with university professors or businesses or other public servants, is the ability to address the incentives for participation. Now, in the academic literature, academics tend to talk about the incentives as being either extrinsic or intrinsic. Extrinsic are those incentives that are what we would simply think of as financial incentives. So we can pay people to participate. But in fact, most of the research shows that intrinsic incentives, that is to say, things like status rewards, the idea of community building or being part of something, there are lots of things we can do that are non-financial that are often the better incentive for people to participate. And in fact, the most valuable incentive for people to participate is the feeling that their time is being well spent. So if people feel their engagement will be worthwhile, if they feel their engagement is relevant, they tend to participate. And in fact, that's exactly what we've seen in Madrid, to go back to the earlier example. The part of the site that I mentioned where people are making proposals for legislation, participation has dramatically dropped off because it's not relevant. Yet the part of the site where government is putting up a policy and then soliciting comments on a policy and explaining how they're going to use people's feedback, that part of the site is actually seeing more participation, is growing over time. Another quick example back to the United States. Do we have anybody from Colorado here? Kate, we got any Colorado folks on the line?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know we, I'm not sure. I know we have California, Maine, New Jersey.
Well,
Colorado, put it in the chat.
We'd love, if you know where Lakewood, Colorado is, we'd love to hear from you. If you're here from Lakewood, Colorado, we'd love to know. Sorry?
Anna's on the line. She just
I'm not from Lakewood, Colorado, though. I'm from Northwest Colorado and Steamboat Springs.
Anna, do you know anything about the Sustainable Neighborhoods program in Lakewood, Colorado?
I do not, but I can imagine several communities, especially in the Front Range, have similar programs. I know in our community, we've got a sustainability council that's all public. It's whoever wants to join and certain key players, but nothing formal from the city.
So it started in Lakewood and it's spread now to at least 4 or 5 cities in Colorado, to the best of my knowledge, but maybe in a different part of the state. they are creating the incentive for residents to get involved in sustainability efforts by giving people what they call credits, points, basically. It's sort of like frequent flyer points. So it's a non-monetary reward, but it's essentially like a status, like earning points in a game, that creates an incentive above and beyond just, fighting climate change and doing good works in your own community. They have 20,000 people participating in 500 different citizen-led sustainability projects. So all that to say, you can create incentives for people that go beyond the monetary. I see there are 2 hands up and I can't see people, so I'm going to ask Graham or Kate to help moderate here and tell me who's raised their hand.
Yeah, I think Anna had one up and put it down, but Ben, it looks like you have something you wanted to share.
Ben, if you're sharing, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
I got to do that unmute thing. I always get caught by that. No, I wanted to share, because they come to mind, especially to talk about incentives. Excuse me, was that the State Park Service again ended up doing as part of the COVID and issues was to have an incentive of getting vaccinated, a Vax Pass, and that was a effort where during, it was like the end of May to the beginning of July, if you had showed proof of getting vaccinated, you got a free pass to the state parks for the rest of the year. So actually how that incentivized people to, it was kind of open to people who had already gotten vaccinated, but the hope was that that was going to incentivize people to get vaccinated so that they can then get free access to the parks. And it was pretty successful. There was about 137,000 showings of people saying, hey, I got my vaccination to the visiting the state parks. A lot of it was like at Island Beach State Park, which is a very popular park in Jersey, right at the beach, of course. So yeah, that was an example of an incentive that was kind of used as part of that participation.
Thank you
That's
so
a
much.
great example, Ben. And actually, I think around the same time, the New Jersey also ran a beer and a shot incentive, and I know that got some
and meet the governor as well, right?
And meet the governor.
A lot of efforts to get people vaccinated, which is
one of the takeaways there is to not be afraid to get a little creative, right? And to think about your intended audience, right? Think about what are some things that are going to get them excited and involved with kind of what you're doing. And again, that's kind of one of those things that it's useful to think about on the front end, right? So not just like, oh, at the end we'll, give someone a gift card or something like that, but really think about how the process itself can be a really fulfilling experience for the participants.
Okay, I'm going to keep us going in the interest of time, but again, please, we'll share all the notes with you after the fact. It may seem pretty obvious, but it's really important to be able to clearly define for people exactly what you need and want them to do, and hopefully tell them how long it's going to take for them to participate. You also want them to understand how what you're asking them to do connects back to what the goal is of the project. So quick example here of a project that I'm signed up for, and some of you may be too. There's a nationwide program to get all of us, as the program is called, signed up to contribute public health data back to a national research project. And what I like about all of us is it has really clear instructions about how you can participate. And it uses icons, simple text, very clear language, and exact time estimates. Every time it tells me to do something like answer a health question or tell them my blood type, it tells me exactly how long it'll take me. Now, this survey it mentions on the slide is a very long survey to do the enrollment and the consent forms. It's very time consuming. But the subsequent ways of participating are actually very, very brief. But the clear delineation of tasks, I think, is incredibly important. It can often be very vague for people what it is you're asking them to do, and more importantly, why you're asking them to do it. So Ed, from an equity perspective, what would you say, how can we think about this concept of right-sizing the commitment?
Sure. Yeah, building on those points on clarity and being concise. there's a lot of value where, to the extent possible, thinking about different ways to capture a lot of that data, different channels, whether that's through in-person engagement, whether that's thinking about leveraging SMS messaging, online engagement, email, phone, all these different ways that you could potentially reach out to people and have them engage with you. And it could be, there might be certain types of activities that are kind of take a little bit more time, right? It's something that takes a little more commitment. And there might be other things you can do where it's more of a one-off, right? Getting together with someone, trying to capture that snapshot and making sure that's something that's not an intensive time commitment. And again, always thinking about kind of accessibility and what are things that can be done by non-English speakers.
Thank you, Ed. And let's see, I'm going to keep us moving forward, and then we'll see if at the tail end we can get some other examples from people. So related to this tasks thing, I think, is also being able to have a clear process, or what tech people would call the workflow. Tech people or business consultants would call the workflow. So a clear definition, working backwards from the end to the beginning, of how the engagement connects to the outcomes of the project. So you want to be able to have a clear steps that are not just the consultation or the engagement, but what's the timeline for feedback? How will that connect then to what you're actually asking people to do? And I think it's a really useful to people to see the whole process, to understand how their feedback will be relevant. Another quick example here that I love, this is a project developed actually initially out of MIT called Risk Map in English. It was first pioneered in Indonesia under the name Peta Bencana, but it has since found its way to Florida and back into the United States. It is a project designed to use new technology to get residents engaged in finding, measuring, and pointing out instances of what we might call fair weather flooding. So basically, streets that are waterlogged, which in many places is not just an inconvenience, it is dangerous to the point of deadly for people when flash floods flood a neighborhood or flood a street and create really dangerous conditions. What I love about this is that the tools are really, really easy to use. It sends you a text message and allows you essentially to point out on your phone how high the water is. It doesn't ask you to say the water is 6 inches or 8 inches, since most people have no idea how big 6 inches is. What it asks you is, it shows you a picture of a person and it says, tell me how high it is. Is it knee high? Is it waist high? Is it ankle high? And it shows you the entire process then about how your data is going to be used, how the report will be entered, exactly what the tasks are, and it essentially lays out the process for using that data. So mainly just wanted to give you that example, but to say that having a clear sense of the process from end to beginning and beginning to end is incredibly useful for ensuring that people feel a sense of trust in the process. What can we do to improve equity? Ed, let me go to you first.
Yeah, I think you captured a lot of it, even when you're giving that great example of making something very clear and accessible. I know something that we always rely on with our design standards is thinking about how we can use visuals to communicate an idea, right? Something that's accessible to everyone. And also thinking about ways to make sure you manage expectations, right? So kind of let people know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what we're going to do with that information.
Okay, last 2 points here. The number 8, being sure you have a way to judge and evaluate what people tell you. So not every public engagement is going to be a competition. So sometimes we do things that are what we might call crowdsourcing, where we ask people to give us answers to something and we're picking one winner in a process. But if you go back to Ben's example, where you had a public meeting, it's not a competition. You want to hear everybody's input. So but even where it's not a competition and you don't have to pick one winner, you still have to have some way to tell people what kind of contributions you're looking for, which sort of things you'll consider, essentially the judging criteria are. And the better that you can articulate those criteria, the more useful is the input that you're going to get from people. So I'm going to I've forgotten the Syria tracker example. So Ed, I'm going to go over to you to talk about the equity insight here. And I'll just wrap up on this point by saying that where you do need some concept of formal judging, you can actually have people from the community participate in that evaluation process. So right now, I have colleagues who are working on a community engagement in Oakland, California, and they are asking residents to come up with ideas for how to solve problems of urban blight in Oakland. And they are asking not just government leaders, but also community leaders, civil society leaders, to be part of evaluating the proposals that citizens make to ensure that those proposals are actually useful and can be implemented at the back end. Ed, over to you.
Great. Yeah, I think you touched on that second point there of the making the evaluation process, whether that's a committee or some kind of a panel representative, is always a strength and a testament to the process. On the other side of that, on gathering inputs, we talked about making it simple. Sometimes you can't boil something down to just icons or iconography or something super simple, but there's an opportunity there to work with the community and actually kind of build in a capacity building process. So having folks in the community link up with folks who are maybe kind of subject matter experts, right, and work with them to build their capacity to think about these concepts in ways that make sense to them. And now after going through that process, they're going to be experts too, right? After kind of going through that. So that's always another way to handle the kind of the inputs of the evaluation process.
Great. Okay, last point here. Can you actually use what people tell you? And again, to reiterate what I said at the beginning, if you can't answer this question, you probably shouldn't start. It is very, very common to engage in some kind of public consultation, to have a town meeting, to have a public hearing, because it's required of you to do so. But there isn't really a commitment to listen to what people actually have to tell you. The reason something like Pulse Point or Good Sam are so effective as engagements is because there's immediate gratification and awareness of how your engagement is useful. You go and give CPR, use a defibrillator, and save somebody's life. You are very aware of how your participation is useful. And in fact, they share back to participants on the network. I get it because I'm signed up. I get a text message telling me the system was activated and somebody helped somebody. I get that notification no matter where it happens in the country, and I love it. And then on the website, you can go and see how many lives were saved and how many people were helped. And just incredibly, incredibly gratifying. It is very rare that we actually do that in government. So last thought here on equity, Ed, beyond the fact that just telling people, how we're going to use their input, anything more we can do here to really promote equity?
There's one question it's always helpful when thinking about actually using the input, and that's will someone who participated in this process want to do it again, right? Like, are they going to be a repeat customer? And not that you necessarily have to repeat every engagement that you do, but you want the user experience, the resident experience after that process to be a positive one, right? And because this is more about developing a relationship, right? About building trust. That's not something that happens kind of on a one-off. It's something that is happened over a series of engagements and a series of different conversations and that you have with the community. So kind of I'll leave it there.
Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up here and just see if there are any with one last point that I alluded to before, and I won't belabor right now, but just to say again, there are different kinds of engagement. Obviously, some things do look like a competition, like what we would think of as crowdsourcing, like asking people to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar, and there is a right answer. More often than not, though, we're looking for lots of good ideas from people. If you've been to the federalchallenge.gov site that's been around for the last decade, where 1,000 federal agencies, more than 1,000 several hundred agencies have put up more than 1,000 requests of the public to solve problems, sometimes those are about getting a single answer. Sometimes they're about coming up with a couple of good answers. But more often than not, you're going to see a lot of things that look much more like what I would call co-creation or co-design. You're getting people to come up with, and I won't go into the details here, multiple good solutions and to work on them together, as is the case again in Lakewood, Colorado. They don't want one sustainability project, they want 500 sustainability projects. So there's more to be said another time about how to think about designing those different types. The point is that there are different, for all of these types, whether it's a competition or it's a collaboration or a co-design, you want to be able to answer these 9 questions. So we have about 10 minutes left, and we can use those 10 minutes for, let me end the slide sharing here for a moment. We can use those for looking at some platforms, or we can use them for questions, reactions, reflections, or other comments for people. So my preference is to hear from you. So let's see if there's any comments or questions, suggestions, reflections first.
I will ask something. Hi, my name's Matt. I'm from the AG's office. So I haven't been here that long, but I've been here long enough to sort of watch a rollout for a basically like taking the public's pulse on use of automated facial recognition by police departments. So we have a poll. If you go to njoid.gov right now, it's like the top headline on it. And I you know, we're frankly not doing almost any of the things that you have suggested we do. I mean, it's basically just a survey. We threw it out there. I don't think there was any, targeted effort to do outreach. I think a lot of the questions that we're asking are a little bit on the abstruse side and possibly not very accessible. I don't think, like, we didn't release it in Spanish, all that stuff. So maybe we are like way behind everybody else in government. I'm going to make the assumption that we're maybe somewhere in the middle. So as a, an agency that's like really, quite behind on this stuff, what would you recommend as a sort of incremental step to do better?
So it's a great question. I don't think you're behind. First of all, you are probably typical. You're probably even ahead to some extent in the fact that you're asking in the first place. We do most things in government without asking anybody, or at least we used to until recently. I think until recently we thought it was okay. And especially if you were a lawyer, and I say that as somebody who's trained as a lawyer, before you get offended, I'm making fun of myself here, is we were educated with the belief that we should do things behind closed doors. It's what in government we call deliberative work product, right? We don't share it until it's ready for sharing. So the notion, you're not a lawyer. Oh, well, okay, good for you. That I'm sorry, you're the non-lawyer among lawyers, which must make you very popular in the AG's office then. I think the things that we've mentioned here, and we're happy to both share the deck and also take this offline, are all things that are concrete enough that there are very, they're very easy things to do. So to the extent to which you don't have to now launch a new platform or suddenly start a citizen assembly the way that they've done in Belgium or in lots of other places, there are things that can be done, for example, just in terms of reaching out to interest groups to then get those interest groups to help amplify the message to other communities who might not otherwise participate, number one. Number two, to get people who are not lawyers to review the site and make sure it is in plain English and not in legalese or government speak, that maybe it is simplified and gives people easy ways to participate. We are happy, the tool, for example, that we use to hear from 17,000 workers in 2 weeks, we used a free open source tool that costs no money to stand up. It was developed by a professor at Princeton University, so home court advantage. But it is a free and open source tool, and there are others like it where it makes it easy to put up something online and get people's feedback in 30 seconds. In other words, a lot of the way we typically do consultation in government, if you think about something like the federal government's regulations.gov site, where you as a member of the public have had the right since 1946 to comment on federal regulations, not online, but for 20 years you had the ability to do it online, and before that on paper. That's very daunting, because not only do you have to be able to make sense of a really long regulation, but you then have to type some long comment. Whereas there are other ways of engaging with people where you could do a quick pulse check, or sort of which of these things is more urgent and important for you, where you're just picking, this one, or you're responding with a text message. So there's some pretty simple things to be done. And we will point you, maybe Matt or Graham or Kate could put a link to the guide from the collective intelligence site that this is based on, which provides just, a summary of some of these things in like 2 pages that can provide some very concrete and simple advice. And we'll also provide our emails in the chat. So sorry, that was a very long answer, but to a very good question. And we're really here to help people apply these things in practice. So don't hesitate to ask us for more help offline. Let me see if there are any other comments in the chat, or questions or interjections. If not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, actually, since my next slide is actually showing that free site that I was just mentioning. So maybe it would be helpful to do that. The important thing to recognize when it comes to using tools is there is no such thing as a one size fits all. It's the case with technology. It's also the case with process. It's what a friend of mine uses the expression that I like, different horses for different courses, that you might have heard. If I'm trying to find out from people what they think is the greatest problem with facial recognition, it's a different process than if I'm asking them to solve the problem of facial recognition, and I'm going to want a different tool for the process. So this tool, for example, is the free tool I was mentioning. You ask people a question like, what is your greatest concern about facial recognition technology? You essentially load the system with 50 answer choices, and then it presents people simply with 2 options. And then they can vote between these 2 options as many times or as few times as they want. It means the participation takes 30 seconds. You can keep going and spend more time, but there's a way to get involved that you can be done in just 30 seconds. And we're happy to give you access to these tools. Again, this is really good for defining the problem with people. Here's the example of the thing the application of the same tool that we used in education. If what you want to do though is get solutions from people, here's another example of another free tool. This one developed out of Iceland, but hosted in the United States, and has passed all the security clearances from DHS and blah, 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 Homeland Security. We've been through all these hoops. Nonprofit, nonpartisan, free and open source tool. It's been used in at least 20,000 different resident engagements. Right now, they're using it in Vienna to get kids participating in policy there. They're using it in Scotland to get help with their policymaking there. We've used it in New Jersey with public servants to get people to supply good ideas for solving hard problems. And last example here with 1 minute to go is another free and open source tool that was developed by MIT. Here's an example from use in Brazil, and it's designed something different. It's designed to help people provide feedback on what's going on the ground, like how is a policy working in practice. So happy to provide links to this offline. The point of this was just to say that there are free tools that are available to make it easy for you guys to apply these things in practice. If what you're looking for is to do online engagement, online has its advantages in that, as we heard before, it can sometimes make it easier for people to participate who would never show up for a public meeting in a church basement under normal conditions. So let me thank you for your participation. We will send links and slides, etc., and the recording to this, and you can, as well as our contact info, so that if we can provide any follow-up help, we are happy to do that, including to help you or your agency go deeper on these things. We're happy to do training that takes more than an hour. We're happy to spend 2 hours with you and your colleagues to figure out how to apply these things in practice. And as Kate is putting in the chat, we have more of these 1 hour mini classes coming up. So we welcome you to sign up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Great to have you. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye. And if you would remember to end the recording.